Hello and welcome to Star Diary, the podcast from the makers of BBC Sky at Night magazine. You can subscribe to the digital edition of the magazine by visiting iTunes, Google Play or Apple News, or to the print edition by visiting skyatnightmagazine.com.
Greetings, listeners, and welcome to Star Diary, a weekly guide to the best things to see in the Northern Hemisphere's night sky. As we are based here in the UK, all times are in BST. In this episode, we'll be covering the coming week from the 23rd to the 29th of September. I'm Ezzy Pearson, the magazine's features editor, and I'm joined today by astronomer Katrin Rayner. Hello, Katrin.
Hi, Ezzy. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to see what we've got coming up in the sky this week. Please do tell.
Okay, well, unfortunately, after the excitement of last week's moon, it's waning all week now, but there's going to be some lovely lunar observing opportunities along with observing two planets. And Titan, one of the moons of Saturn, it's visible again, and Comet A3 Shushan Atlas reaches perihelion. So, as I mentioned, moon is waning all week. There's going to be some lovely observing opportunities to see the moon close to two planets and the bright stars in Gemini. So on the 23rd of September, we have a 58% lit moon positioned closely with Jupiter, which will be below the moon. Look to the eastern sky in the early hours of the morning. And if you're up in the wee hours, Mars, Jupiter, the moon and the Pleiades will be a fantastic sight in the sky.
It is nice to have the planets back. We've had a couple, like the first half of the year, they were a bit rubbish, but it's nice that they're back and they're being big and bright and obvious to see.
Yes, I did feel like sometimes in the summer when it was a clear night and I was up late, I was like, oh, I want to look at something, not necessarily something that was going to take up a lot of time or was going to be complicated to see, but just to see a planet or the moon. But the moon wasn't around, and as you just said, there was no planets to look at either.
The planets, they make themselves obvious when they're, not when they're on the other side of the solar system or something, but Jupiter and Mars, when they're around, they're there.
Yeah, it's fab, isn't it? It's really lovely to see. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward now to getting the telescope back out in the autumn. On the 24th at 7:49 p.m, the moon is going to be in its last quarter phase. And then on the 25th, the moon will be 45% lit and located just above Mars in the early morning. In the early hours of the 26th, a 36% lit moon is going to be very close to the stars Castor and Pollux, the two heads of the twins in the constellation of Gemini. So they're just going to be to the left of the moon, and Mars is going to be to the right. So this is going to make a lovely astrophotography opportunity.
That'll be a nice wide field shot for someone to get.
Yes, it's going to be fab. So, it's, again, astrophotography, it's not something I've done much of, but things like this make me kind of like inspired to get a better camera and try my hand at doing this kind of thing.
And you can actually do a lot of astrophotography just with something like a DSLR camera, which a lot of people just use for ground-based photography, which is why we're actually running a masterclass all about how you can take your DSLR and turn it onto the night sky and do some astrophotography with that. And this kind of thing is just ideal for that sort of photography. So if any of our listeners there are interested in potentially maybe dipping their toe in a bit of photography but don't want to spend a huge amount on a specialist camera or anything like that, then do sign up for that masterclass and we'll give you all of the tips about how to get started in that.
Well, I think I might actually join that, as you've mentioned it.
It's a good place to start, especially if you have a DSLR camera, which a lot of people do. And even if you don't, you can pick up one fairly affordably secondhand. It doesn't need to be the world's best. Obviously, the better equipment you have, the better pictures you will get. But I always think as long as you temper your expectations of what you can do with the equipment that you have, it's a great way to get started in something, is just, start a bit smaller and then work your way up.
Even just taking pictures of star trails or something, that's easy enough, I think, and the results are so pleasing. But sadly enough, I think my DSLR is so old now. Smartphones have better megapixels on my DSLR cameras. So.
It's not necessarily about the sensor on the camera. It's usually about the lens and the amount that you can control it You can sort of adjust things like the ISO, which is basically, it's the equivalent of how sensitive the film is, except it's not using film. You can change the shutter speed and stuff like that, which you can do on some cameras, but it's a lot more difficult. And that's what's really like advantage of a DSLR. So even an older one, you can still get some really good shots.
So solar system-wise, on the 25th, we have Titan visible again. As I mentioned last week, it's well positioned at the moment. It's in Earth-facing side of its orbit. And at 11:22 p.m, Titan will be located just above Saturn's North Pole. You can see it through a small telescope. But if you do want to try your hand at viewing the other 6 visible moons, you will need a telescope of 6 inches or larger. So Titan is the brightest in magnitude at approximately +8, whilst the remaining 6 are a lot dimmer. But if you want to have a go at this, and if you want to see where the moons are positioned, then, take a look at a stargazing app. And there is a great guide, actually, Azzy, to observing the moons of Saturn on the Sky at Night website. I enjoyed reading that when I was putting the star diary together.
Yes, you can find that over on our website, skyatnightmagazine.com. I will put a link to that down in the show notes below, as well as a link to the masterclass as well. So you should be able to find all of that information there.
And all week we have Jupiter in the constellation of Taurus. At the beginning of the week it rises at 10:15, and towards the end of the week it will be rising just before 10 p.m. And Mars in the constellation of Gemini all week, rising just after 11:30 p.m. at the beginning of the week and just before 11:30 p.m. as the week ends. So keep an eye out for those 2 planets. But let's not forget about Uranus and Saturn. Uranus is well placed in September. It's positioned near the Pleiades and Taurus. And Saturn is in the constellation of Aquarius, which is best seen in the south after midnight. So we do have a lot of planets happening, don't we? As we've just mentioned, there is quite a lot going on there.
Yes, definitely. They're making up for the first half of the year.
I haven't mentioned comets really in a long time. I'm always a bit reluctant to mention comets, just in case, something happens to them. But I'll mention Comet C2023 Shushan Atlas. On the 27th, it is going to be at perihelion, which means it's going to be at its closest point to the Sun in its orbit, just over a mere 58 million kilometres away from the Sun.
Just round the corner, barely a stone's throw away. Because it's 150 million, I think, is 1 AU, which is the distance between the Earth and the Sun. So it's about just over a third of that.
Yeah. So, in terms of that, it's pretty close, isn't it? So the comet has been predicted as the next bright comet, and at present it's positioned very low in the east, rising just 50 minutes before the Sun, and it's at magnitude of +4.5, but because of its location and time of rising, you probably just won't see it. I don't think you will, but we are hoping that the comet will become visible to the naked eye in the evening sky from mid-October. So I think everyone has their fingers crossed there, because like a lot of people, I'm desperate to see a naked eye comet again. I haven't seen one since Neowise.
It's been a while. I think that was the last naked eye one. I feel there might have been one that was naked eye, but barely.
Yeah.
But yes, this was touted for a while. People thought Shushan Atlas might be the next great comet, but it's not quite living up to that hype. It is still looking to be a good one for those who can see it. It won't be visible in everybody's skies.
Yes. I've seen photographs of Comet, was it McNaught? I can't remember what year that was around, but oh my gosh, the tail of that comet just looked absolutely amazing.
Yes. Of course, you never can tell exactly what it's going to look like until it gets here. So it might get to October and then we suddenly go, ooh, goodness, it's incredible. But we'll just have to wait and see.
Or be like, oh,
yeah,
like a bit of a damp squib. Yeah, like, oh no. We'll keep everything crossed, Ezzy. Just quickly mention Comet 13P Olbers here too, because I mentioned it last week. It's now approaching magnitude +11, and even at 9 p.m. on the 27th of September, it's going to be very low in the west. It's pretty dim. Probably won't see it, but, it's nice to know that there are comets out there.
They're making their way around the Sun. One of these days we'll get a really nice, pretty, hopefully, Shushan Atlas will be the next naked eye one. But you never can tell with comets. That's half of the enjoyment of them.
Yeah, enjoyment or disappointment. I'm not quite sure what.
But you never know what you're going to get. It makes it that much sweeter when you do finally get that really amazing show.
Yeah, so hopefully now when we're talking again in Star Diary, kind of October, November time will be woo.
Yes, hopefully when we come back in October, we'll be able to talk about that. And if you want to make sure that you keep up with the updates right the way through until then, please do subscribe to the podcast, because we'll be back next week with even more stargazing highlights. But for now, thank you very much to Katrin for taking us through all of that week's highlights. To summarise what's going on again, the moon will be waning all week. Jupiter will be in Taurus, Mars will be in Gemini, and Saturn will be in Aquarius. So you'll be able to see all of those throughout the week. On the 23rd, you can see a 58% lit waning moon positioned close to Jupiter. Look to the sky after 11 p.m. to see them rising in the east. On that same night, Mars, Jupiter, the Moon, and the Pleiades will be visible in the early morning sky to the east. On the 25th, a 45% lit moon will be located just above Mars in the early morning sky. And you can also see Titan, Saturn's largest moon, located just above the Saturn's northern pole at 11:22 p.m. On the 26th, in the early hours of the morning, the moon will be near Castor and Pollux in Gemini, while Mars will be to the right of the moon. Then finally, on the 27th, Comet C 2023 Susinshan Atlas will be at perihelion. Hopefully the comet will be a naked eye target in October, so we'll keep an eye on that one. But in the meantime, you also might want to take a look at Comet 13P Olbers, which will be low in the western sky and approaching magnitude 11 at the moment. So lots to be getting on within this week's night sky, and hopefully we'll see you all back here for another episode next week. Goodbye. If you want to find out even more spectacular sights that will be gracing the night sky this month, be sure to pick up a copy of BBC Sky at Night magazine, where we have a 16-page pull-out sky guide with a full overview of everything worth looking up for throughout the whole month. Whether you like to look at the moon, the planets, or the deep sky, whether you use binoculars, telescopes, or neither, our Sky Guide has got you covered, with detailed star charts to help you track your way across the night sky. From all of us here at BBC Sky at Night magazine, goodbye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Star Diary podcast from the makers of BBC Sky at Night magazine, which was edited by Lewis Dobbs. For more of our podcasts, visit our website at skyatnightmagazine.com/podcasts, or head to Spotify, iTunes, or your favourite podcast player.